I heat up, I can't cool down. Got me spinning round and round, round and round and round it goes. Where it stops, nobody knows. Every time you call my name.
Welcome to Law Talk. This is Mark McMann. I am here alone, not alone. I have a guest, but Dave Kaler wasn't able to make it. He just came back from vacation. He had some family stuff to tend to. But if you have any questions, again, it's Law Talk. We have today a guest, Gary York, who's written a couple of books. His second book, the first book was Corruption Behind Bars: Stories of Crime and Corruption in Our Prison System. That was published back in 2012, and now he has a new book, which is published this year. It's called Inside the Inner Circle: More Stories of Crime and Corruption in Our American Prison System. If you have any questions regarding this, because we're going to talk about it, there's different chapters, there's all kinds of scintillating stuff in this book that's interesting. If you have any legal questions too, you can give us a call. Again, I'm Mark McMahon. I have McMahon PA. We do family law. We do that's divorces and child custody or child time sharing is what they call it now. We also do VA benefits if you've been denied your VA disability benefits and you want to and need to appeal. Even if you haven't at that point where you just have questions about the initial submission, give us a call at 393-9010 or visit McMannLaw.com. And Dave Kaler does criminal and he does personal injury as well. You, of course, can get a hold of him at KalerLaw.com. But besides that, let's talk, Gary.
Yes, sir.
Gary York, give me a little bit of your background. I was actually looking, and I know we touched on this before, but you, like me, were in the Army.
Yes, sir, I was. And first of all, I'd like to thank you for having me on the show, and I appreciate it very much. And yes, sir, I was in the Army for 8.5 years active duty. I was a military policeman, and I got out as a...
My girlfriend's son is there. He's in Afghanistan. Going to come back next month. He's an MP as well. He loves it. I don't know if he's going to stay in or not. I don't know if he's going to make it a career, but at least he survived this, even though we have a president that announces when we're leaving, and we have no friends over there to help us because they know we're leaving, so go figure. But okay, Gary, tell me a little bit. Your first book was pretty successful, right?
Well, it's been out for 2 years now, and I'm proud to say that it's still selling after 2 years, and it jumps in and out of the rankings, but I can't ask for anything more than that. My first book I ever wrote, and I'm not a seasoned author like many authors are, but I'm pretty proud of the way Corruption Behind Bars is done, and it's gotten some national attention, a couple of coast-to-coast radio shows, and NBC came and interviewed me about it, so I can't ask for any more out of it.
Well, again, part of your background, you're an MP for 9 years, but also you were an inspector when it comes to the prison system, correct?
Yes, sir. I started out as a correctional officer after I got out of the Army, not thinking that would be my lifetime career. I took the job, as many soldiers do when they get out of the service. They get a job as soon as they can, and that's what I did. And I thought it was just going to be a temporary thing working for corrections. But within a year, I got promoted to probation and parole. And a year later, I got promoted to probation correctional staff 2, which is a senior probation officer. And then shortly after that, I interviewed for prison inspector and got that promotion. And here I am today, 26.3 years later, still in the business.
How long were you doing that? How long did you do the prison inspecting?
I was a prison inspector conducting investigations in Florida for 12 years.
And then at some point you segued, and I was reading this in the book, somehow you found yourself in Uzbekistan? What's that all about?
Well, what had happened, I had done a death investigation in the Florida Department of Corrections at Charlotte Correctional Institution, which is in Book 1, Corruption Behind Bars, on the death of inmate John Edwards. And Washington, D.C. had sent some civil criminal attorneys down to work the case with me and prosecute the case. And after we finished the case, it was a couple of years later that the prison system in Uzbekistan was trying to modernize their prison system, get it up to par.
Was it pretty third world at the time?
It was the third world prison over there. And I get a call from Washington, D.C. The attorneys that I worked with in 1998 and 99 on Edwards' death had recommended me to be part of a team to go there with their group and just give seminars and teach a little bit on how to run a prison system. And so that's how I got on that team. I was asked to be on that team based on working with some attorneys from the Criminal Division in Washington.
How long were you over there?
The actual trip was canceled at the last minute. Mm-hmm. The team was together. We assembled our classes. We had our lesson plans. And the week before we were supposed to fly over there, 6 Americans were taken hostage. They had come out of the embassy, the U.S. Embassy, and we were called down because they said it would be unsafe. If we were to fly over there, we might be taken hostage as well. Oh. So it was great to be picked for the team. It was great to prepare for it, and I was actually looking forward. I had my passport ready to roll, but maybe there's a reason I didn't go. Maybe I would have been one of the hostages.
Divine intervention.
Yes, sir.
So we talked a little bit about before the show some recent incidents that have happened, and before we get into the book and the specifics, the chapters. Tell us a little bit about this guy. Was it scolded in the shower? I guess it's up in or down in Dade County.
Yes, sir. Well,
and this just goes to show the importance as to what it is, why you write the book, and just kind of shed light on this. And these are just some real world, real time examples. So tell me about the guy down in Dade County.
Yes, sir. Well, I'd like to preface it with saying we have a lot of darn good officers out there, honest officers. And again, I'm writing these books just to educate and inform. And protect the honest officers from the corrupt officers. And I'm hoping that someday incidents like this are going to stop. But in 2012 at Dade Correctional Institution, a mentally unstable inmate in the mental health unit, David Rainey, defecated in his cell, and he wouldn't clean it up.
In his cell?
In his cell, yes, his individual one-man cell.
Does he have like autism or something? I mean, this guy.
He was considered borderline retarded and slow.
Okay.
But he did know what was going on and how to follow rules and things. And the officers decided for punishment.
The officers, not the inmates. The officers.
No. The officers decided for punishment. They were going to put him in a shower, which the showers in these dormitories are very small and confined. They locked him in the shower. And since he would not clean up his mess, they turned the shower on the hot water, and
the hottest they could do.
The hottest they could get it, and they left him in there for an hour with this scalding hot water. Inmate witnesses testified that for an hour they heard him scream, "Please, please, I'll never do it again. I'll be good. I'll be good. I won't do this ever again." And they allowed the water to continue to run on him, scalding hot water, and his skin finally started to just peel off his body and slither down his body onto the shower floor. And as his skin is falling off his body onto the shower floor, no one goes to his rescue, none of the officers. And he dies in the shower. 2 years later, 2014, now it's finally getting some attention.
Why did it take so long? I mean, to me, that should have been done within days.
Well, there was some cover-up from the higher staff.
Oh, go figure.
Yes, there was some cover-up. And there's several groups out there now that have caused enough attention to this incident that they ended up finally terminating the warden of that prison, and it's now being investigated by the FBI. It's also being investigated by the governor's IG's office, the Inspector General's office of the governor, and there's a book coming out very soon. I believe it's actually coming out this week by a psychologist who actually worked at that prison when this happened. And he has written the inside story about inmate Darren Rainey and this death, and that should be out soon on Amazon.
What was Rainey in for? Do you know?
That I don't know. I do not know what Rainey was in for. But, no matter what he was in for, whether it was 18 months or 30 years, there's other ways to discipline an inmate for not following the rules.
Well, there's other examples, and we'll go ahead and touch on those. We got to take a break, though. We'll be right back with more Law Talk. Back to Law Talk, second segment. We are having a conversation with Gary York. He is the author of Inside the Inner Circle, More Stories of Crime and Corruption in Our American Prison System. Now, Gary, one of the things we were talking about is corruption, and we want to touch on the fact that corruption, and again, a part of it has to do with the prison, but you gave me a statistic as to what corruption, how corruption costs the taxpayers and costs the country annually?
Well, in the United States annually, corruption across the board, not just the prison system, but all corruption, big business, small business, government, is $1,000 billion a year for the United States. And just think if we could end corruption or at least slow it down, the money that could be used, what good that money would do for other things in our country.
Well, I mean, it's astonishing, and it doesn't seem like it's getting any better. It seems as if the prisoners are running the prison at this point, or the crazies are running the hospital.
Well, the prisons are adding to that number, and they're keeping their share up pretty well, unfortunately. And to me, the prison system is a controlled environment, so we should be able to start there and try to end some of the corruption and then move up higher up the ladder, to stop corruption.
One of the things that I read in the book had to do with while we're talking about the shortfalls of some of these prison guards and some of the wardens and all that, but the stress level associated with this, I think you said there's a 39% higher suicide rate. The mortality rate after retirement is pretty high. Go ahead and tell the folks about that.
Well, for the honest officers who do make their full 25-year career, and some of them do 30, those guys have worked hard in a very stressful environment. Because think of this, you not only have to worry about the inmates if you're an honest officer, and the fact that they may harm you at some time, the stress, but you also have to worry, and I've interviewed officers that have told me this, that they have to be worried sometimes about the corrupt officers. They may see a corrupt officer commit a crime. Now they're in a dilemma, an ethical dilemma.
There may be their buddy. There may be somebody that you don't want to. The whole thing, the thin blue line kind of deal.
The thin blue line. What should I do? Should I report him? If I report him, then they're going to maybe come after me themselves,
or his buddies,
or retaliate against me, or set me up to make it look like I've done something illegal. So it puts them in a tough spot. My hat's off to those guys who make it 25, 30 years, doing an honest job, and having to worry not only about the inmates but the corruption within the prison itself.
Well, the other thing they have to worry about is diseases, like being tuberculosis, and one of the things you said. There's all these diseases you got to worry about. Them spitting at you, and blood, and all that, right?
You have to worry about MRSA, staph infection, tuberculosis, AIDS. You're working with these in an environment that is several times riskier than on the street, because now you're taking a group of institution. He spent 30-plus years in the prison system. And I interviewed him for my second book, and he gave me the story of the Buddy Rollerson escape, but he also gave me the story of the political inmate. And he said he had never revealed this until now that he's retired. And even though he's retired, he would not give me the full, every little detail. He would not give me the name of the political inmate, but he told me the story. And he explained that one day in the mid-'90s, he was sitting in his office at the DeSoto Correctional Institution, and he gets a phone call from an individual who said he is a representative of Governor Lawton Child's office, and he is getting a van with 2 people to come pick up a particular inmate who will be released from prison and turned over to a youth camp in Lake Placid.
This particular individual is serving a 25-year minimum mandatory.
Correct. This individual had only been in prison for a few months, sentenced to 25 years minimum mandatory for murder. And the warden said, I don't know who you are. I'm not going to do this.
He says, I don't know who you are, to this individual who called him saying that you're going to release this individual and it's going to happen the next few hours.
He hangs up. He says, I don't know who this individual is. He gets a phone call a few minutes later from the Secretary of the Department of Corrections. And the Secretary of the Department of Corrections says, Warren, get that inmate ready. It's not a joke.
So he knows who this guy is, the Secretary of the Department of Corrections.
He knows who this is. He knows the voice, and that's his boss, the head man of corrections. He says, get him ready. There'll be a van to pick him up. We'll send you a transfer order later. Take him off your prison head count. And they do.
And so what ultimately, at the end of the day, what is the conclusion here?
Well, at the end of the day, the inmate head count is one less, and the inmate's never seen again. So how do you get rid of a 25-year minimum mandatory sentence just like that?
So it's a mystery. He obviously knew somebody in Tallahassee, I'm guessing, or
the,
somewhere.
The inmate's family knew somebody in high places, because I'll tell you what, I don't know many people that could get that done for them.
That is absolutely crazy. Okay, we've got to take a break. We'll come back with more law talk, Gary York, and the book. We'll talk about more stories. Welcome back to Law Talk. I'm Mark McMahon. I'm sitting here with Gary York. If you have any need for a family law attorney, if you have any need for, you're a veteran, you've applied for benefits, you've been denied, and you want to appeal, or if you have a need for a will, call me 863-393-9010, or visit McMannLaw.com. If you are in the need of a criminal defense attorney, you always can visit Kaler Law Group at KalerLaw.com and just submit a request for them to contact you, and they will do so. Enough about me. Enough about Dave. Let's talk about you, Gary.
All right, sir.
We have more chapters to talk about. In fact, let me go ahead and ask you. There's prison love, right? There's sometimes officers will get in trouble, and I want you to talk to me about prison love. Actually, it's misconduct with an officer, Barbara Davy.
Yes, Barbara Davy, DeSoto Correctional Institution. She was a woman that I later learned after we finished the investigation that didn't have a great home life, pretty much a verbally abusive husband who didn't pay attention to her, and she worked at the prison with all these male inmates. And she ended up being involved with an inmate, and not only involved sexually, but helping him get things he wanted. Now, this particular inmate was heavy into weightlifting, and he wanted creatine powder, which is sold over the counter at your GNC stores.
This was back in the 90s. Creatine was huge back then.
In the 90s, creatine was a big thing. Mm-hmm. And however, creatine sold over the counter becomes a felony when it's introduced into a prison.
Is that because they don't want the inmates to get bigger than the guards?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. Under Florida Statute 944.47, anything not on the authorization list for inmates to have is contraband and is considered a felony. And the second thing is, yes, if the inmates get too bulked up, it's much harder to control them if you have to use force on them.
So what happens with Davy? How do they meet? What happens?
Well, inmates are always looking for an officer, whether it be female inmates watching a male officer or male inmates watching a female officer. They're looking for someone who has low self-esteem, someone who may talk to other officers and they catch wind that their life isn't so great in their marriage, or their love life is not so great on the outside. They have bills to pay and they can't make their bills. Anyone like this becomes a prime target for an inmate. And male inmates are always looking for two things. If they can find a female staff member to be their lover, that's a big score for them in prison. And if they can find a female staff mate not only to be their lover, but that will bring them items into the prison, they've scored big time.
So that is in play here with Miss Officer Barbara Davy. Who was the guy? What was Robert Hastings?
Inmate Robert Hastings was a very smooth talker, a weightlifter, pretty good-looking guy, and he could have probably quite a few women on the outside, but he's in prison, and his goal was to find him a girlfriend and get him some creatine, and he picked Officer Hastings as a weak, low self-esteem officer and started giving her compliments, drawing little cards for her, pictures of flowers, and giving them to her, writing poems for her. And if an inmate isn't good at writing poems, he can always find some inmates in there that are very good with words and make it look as if he wrote the poem. And this started to turn her head. She was getting attention from a very bulked up, good-looking guy. And eventually she broke and became his lover and would bring him creatine into the prison.
So this went on for how long? I mean,
this went on for a few months, and he gave her a connection on the creatine, which was a friend of his on the outside that would purchase the creatine and meet her and give her the creatine to take to him.
How did she come to be found out?
Well, there was another staff member that worked at DeSoto Correctional Institution. And this is just very bizarre way for her to get caught. There's no telling how long it would have went otherwise. This person off duty liked to listen to a police scanner. And if you're familiar with Arcadia and DeSoto County, it's not a big populated area, and Arcadia is a small town.
Not a lot going on.
Not a lot going on. Listening to the police scanner while working on a Sunday afternoon in the house, cooking, cleaning in the kitchen. And police scanners back then, and they may still do it now, could pick up cell phone calls sometimes. And her scanner picks up a cell phone conversation between the female officer and another individual, and they're talking about the inmate, and they're talking about DeSoto Correctional, and they're talking about creatine, and she stops and realizes that this is at the prison she works at. And she picks up the names, and she goes back to work and reports what she'd heard on the police scanner.
So she reports, and an investigation starts, and you get involved.
I get involved. And since we already have the names provided to us from the staff member that listened to the police scanner, we have the inmate's name and officer's name. So then I ask what shift and what dorm she's working in, and we get the list, and sure enough, she's been working in the same dorm as this inmate. We get the inmate, we search his property, we find these letters from her and other poems that he's getting ready to give to her. We confiscate them. And we gather all the tangible evidence and get it together. And I decide that I'll go for it and interview her in the warden's conference room and just put these things out on the table.
And that probably was key because, as you indicate, when you start interviewing her, she pretty much opens up.
In a lot of those cases, probably 90% of the cases, if you can put some letters in front of them, either from her to the inmate or from the inmate to her, pictures, poems, letters, cards, plus the fact of what I told her that we had learned from the police scanner, she gave in, started to cry, and admitted that she'd been having an affair with this inmate.
Okay, so obviously her husband probably wasn't too happy about this.
No, and I didn't get involved in the marriage part, but I'm sure when she went home without a job that day that she had to explain a few things.
She lost her job. Did she get, since she was bringing in contraband, which is obviously a criminal act, do you know whether or not she got charged?
Yes, in this particular case, not in all cases. Sometimes they'll allow the officer to relinquish their certification for life and be terminated from their job. In this case, she got 1 year misdemeanor probation, relinquished her certification for life, and lost her job.
There's a certain psyche when it comes to women that can be plucked. There's another, when we come back from the break, you say some of these women with their low self-esteem, but others, they could be beautiful women. This one didn't happen to be so beautiful, but there's others, in the next chapter we'll talk about, beautiful women that can also be plucked too for whatever reason.
There's other women that have been beautiful and have that, they like the bad boy. They like bad boys even before they start working in the prison.
And when we come back from break, we'll go ahead and talk about that, about the Patricia Lynn Fleming case, looking for a dream lover, is what you call it. We'll be right back.
All right.
McMann, the last segment of the show. We're here with Gary York talking about his book. And again, the title of the book is Inside the Inner Circle, More Stories of Crime and Corruption in Our American Prison System. Tell me a little bit about this woman, Patricia Lynn Fleming. 22 years old, you said beautiful woman, another example of inmates perhaps taking advantage of somebody who works at as a guard or just a staff.
Yes, well, Officer Fleming was a beautiful young girl who had a great family, a great upbringing, and they wanted her to have a successful career and successful life. The problem was, we learned later, even before she became a correctional officer, she kind of had the want for the bad boy image. And she went through the Correctional Officer Academy and did really well. She went to Avon Park Correctional, started out really, really well, did her job great, got good reports from her supervisors, got good appraisals, finished her first year of probation with just excellent record. They were real pleased, and they were happy to have a female officer that was professional and did her job well. But she, as with this other officer, got connected with an inmate who was also a tall, very well-built, good-looking inmate. And she was a little bit tougher to get to. The inmate had to spend several months talking with her to finally, I hate to use this word, but break her down and get her to open up to him. And eventually, to make a long story short, she started an inmate-staff relationship, and had sexual relations with the inmate.
So she gets under his spell, and ultimately she provides him with a cell phone. And go ahead and talk about that.
Yes, the inmate. Well, they started having sex in the supply closet of the dormitory, and through my interview with the inmate and so forth, he kind of described some of the sexual scenes that they had, and I described them in my book. I won't talk about them here, but they're in the book. And he also explained that he ended up having her bring him a cell phone into the prison so that he could use it to do his drug trade.
So he was doing drug deals from inside the prison?
Correct, but he needed a cell phone.
Right.
And he needed the battery charged every so often. So he got a cell phone and a battery brought in by his now girlfriend, the officer. And about every second or third day, she would bring him a fresh battery for the cell phone or take it out and get it charged.
He was serving a considerable amount of time, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He had a lot of time in for drug charges, yeah.
And so obviously she's under his spell, as I said, and not really thinking clearly. So what happens? I mean, how does this found out? You get involved. What do you do? What happens?
Well, what happens in 90% of the cases, other inmates learn that this is going on. I mean, they see what's going on, and they're there 24 hours a day, and they know what's going on, so they report to staff. There's a relationship going on between her and the inmate. And again, I come in and do my phone calls. I listen to phone calls. In this case, we didn't get anything on the phone because there was no need for him to talk on the phone because
He has a cell phone.
where it's recorded, because he has a cell phone. So I came up empty on the recorded inmate phone calls. So I have to search his property, pressure him, search for the cell phone, and eventually we get enough evidence, just like in a lot of the cases, where we can confront her.
He doesn't talk. You get actual evidence from the cell phone and whatnot, and the evidence from the cell phone, but he doesn't talk. He won't give her up.
He doesn't talk. He basically curses me out and tells me to go off somewhere, you know.
But you bring her in.
We bring her in, and, you know, I think because of her upbringing and deep down inside wanting to be an honest person, I think that's why she gave in and confessed everything. Because deep down inside, she knew what she did was wrong, and she wasn't a street thug, as some people are. She was deep down inside was taught to tell the truth and be honest.
So you do your report. What ultimately ends up happening to her?
Well, in her case, she did not get any criminal charges, but she had to relinquish her, of course, her certification for life, and she was terminated from her job. So she can't ever work in corrections or law enforcement again.
One of the things that you wanted to do, and this is just, we're just touching the surface when it comes to the book, but you ended up leaving that position and going to another position, other employment, and ultimately because you couldn't take it anymore.
Well,
when I say that, I mean it's like it's corruption, right?
Well, what had happened, I did the investigations for 12 years. My first 8 years, I was under two different secretaries of the Department of Corrections, and I got Inspector of the Year with one of them. I got an accommodation with the other one. And then Crosby, who is in the first book, Secretary James Crosby, who ended up in prison for 8 years, enters the picture my last 4 years. I did investigations, and if you were one of Crosby's people, and it was an administrative investigation, not much happened. But if I did the same type investigation on another officer, but they weren't in with Crosby's group, they would get fired or terminated from the job and lose their certification. So the punishment was not fair across the board. It was not swift and fair across the board. And then I was told I was too aggressive, and I was told to kind of back off a little bit.
You started to receive phone calls, and your wife as well.
And I started to receive phone calls, anonymous phone calls, to back off. And my wife, who also did 22 years with the Department of Corrections, who did not do investigations, but she got phone calls at her work. Need to tell your husband to back off. So now they're starting to hit home. And I realized that now, after 8 years of working with a good organization, this new organization under Secretary James Crosby is corrupt and making threats towards me. And I'd done the job for 12 years, and I thought it was time to move on. I had a clean record, an excellent record, and there was an agency there was a couple of agencies that were ready to take me right away.
And so you make the move, and you don't regret, obviously, getting out of it when you did, given who was head of the...
Correct. And I ended up having to talk to some FBI investigators out of Jacksonville after I left. There was a short newspaper article written in the Tallahassee Democrat about me, talking about the corruption and having to talk to the FBI about what was going on. I could only tell them what I knew, and I was very happy to hear that a year after we left, James Crosby was sentenced to 8 years federal prison, and I thought, well, you know what, justice does come around. It may not be quick, but it does come around in the end.
The corruption. And I know we have 1 minute left. The book has actually been used by professors, one in Texas,
Yes.
which is a good thing, as part of a criminology type of basic major, right?
It's being used in colleges across the country in her book, Ethical Dilemmas and Decision-Making in the Criminal Justice System, and she actually uses some things out of my first book, Corruption Behind Bars, for students to learn
Part of her class.
what not to do in part of the class.
Okay, Gary York, the book is Inside the Inner Circle, American Prison System. Get it on Amazon.com, as well as your own website, which is corruptionbehindbars.com.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And want to thank you very much for coming. This is the second time. We have more stories. We'll probably have you on again, especially when you do your third book. Have a great week. Mark McMann signing off Law Talk. On behalf of David Kaler, have a great week.
Thank you.